Hey Internet, welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction. And this week on Greek Tuesday, we're looking at Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 29. We got some really cool stuff going on this week, and in order to make it all kind of fit into its place, we're going to have to take a step back and look at chapters 14 and 15 in the Gospel of Matthew from a bird's eye view. You might remember that a few weeks back, we spent 3 weeks in a row on Matthew chapter 13, which was this highly crafted and constructed segment of parables with certain kind of ups and downs and a flow all the way towards the center, which then ended with the movement into Matthew 14 verses 1 and following, where John the Baptist's reappearance as the man killed by Herod the king set off kind of a midway point in the entire book of Matthew, so that from and flowing out of the two appearances of John the Baptist, we have the two kind of halves of the book. In the first half, Jesus is manifesting himself, and it's to the joy of basically everyone he meets. In the second half, we see increasing dissension and fighting back from this group of people called the Pharisees, who are kind of central not to today's text but sort of to today's text. That is to say, everything that follows John's appearance to be murdered by Herod in chapter 14 begins this next kind of highly crafted segmentation passage of the second half of chapter 14 and most of chapter 15, which has a very intentionally derived form to it. That's what we're going to kind of be talking about right now, this form, how these series of stories or narratives or events were put into place, not just because they happened in this order, although they may have, but because Matthew is trying to craft a point with these very real, very inerrant remembrances of Jesus' life and actions and deeds to teach and preach to you law and gospel, who Jesus is, what he did, why, all that stuff. So the first thing to know when you're looking at this segment, this section, which is really Matthew chapter 14 verse 13 through all of Matthew chapter 15, is that it's set up as a chiasm. Chiasm coming from the Greek letter chi or chi, which basically just looks like an X to us. And the idea of the chiasm is that it is, like an X, a mirror image of itself. So that no matter how you look at it, there are parallels which help you draw conclusions about the meaning of the text, moving from the outside to the in, so that what is at the center of the text is the most important thing. This is a common structure, especially in Hebraic poetry, for example, the Psalms, and was intentionally used as a form of Hebrew poetry in order to emphasize certain teachings, both through the parallels that are developed as well as through that central idea which is found in the middle, not on the end, right? In Western thought, we start at the beginning and we move toward the end, and the end is what really matters. Not so in the chiasm. The chiasm, both sides slide inward to the heart. Now this section is not a perfect chiasm, but it is almost a perfect chiasm, and you'll see what I mean when I say that. It begins with and it ends with what should be kind of two obvious bookends, although for a while there, back in the day, when modernist biblical scholars thought everything had to be read like a newspaper, it threw them for a loop, because you have Jesus feeding 5,000 and then you have Jesus feeding 4,000, and it happens like right next to each other. And they're like, oh look, a mistake in the text. It's so obvious what idiots these people are to believe this stuff. Oh, whatever. They're just kind of reading their assumptions and presuppositions into the text and then judging it on that account. Nonetheless, what happens is you do find that following John the Baptist's death, you have Jesus feeding 5,000 people with a bit of bread and fish and having 12 basketfuls left over at the end. 12, the number of the church. And then, about a chapter and a half later, you have Jesus feeding 4,000 people with some bread and some fish and having 7 basketfuls left over. 7, the number of holiness. So 12 and 7 as the borders, the bookends of feeding with loaves and fishes, lots and lots of people who just also happen to be Jews. This is important too, because throughout all the stuff that goes on in between, you have an almost constant, not quite, but almost constant, near constant reference to food. Food and faith. All right, so let's keep building this thing up. You got your feeding of the 5,000, feeding of the 4,000. Then you move down inward towards the middle, and you find you have two things that don't quite line up, although they will if you wait just a moment. On the one hand, you have our text from last week, Jesus walking on water, which, even though Jesus does walk on water in the middle of it, is not maybe the most important thing that goes on there. The most important thing that goes on in the text of Jesus walking on water is Peter not walking on water, sinking into the water and crying out, Lord, save me. Very key, especially that phrase if you're going to understand the chiasm. On the other side, exactly parallel to it in form but not in function, is a little tidbit about Jesus going up after today's text onto a mountain to pray, at which time he also heals many people of all sorts of diseases and so forth. Big text, little text, ye have little faith, calling out, save me, healing people. But if you keep going in further, what you find is that just flipped on the opposite opposite side, you're going to have big text, little text. Little text following Peter calling out, save me, is, hey, go figure, Jesus on the other side of the water at Gennesaret healing a bunch of people brought to him, just like parallel to here. Whoa, because then on this side is the larger text to truly parallel in the chiasm with the reverse action going on. The Peter in the water text, you have this woman of the Canaanites. That's what we're going to be looking at and really pulling apart in just a moment. And then you have, as this slides down into the middle, the true center of the entire section. And guess who's right there? The Pharisees. The Pharisees talking about food and how the disciples aren't washing their hands before they eat. At which point Jesus gets into a bit of an extended discourse with them about how it is not what goes into a person that makes one unclean, but what comes out. That is, what matters most is faith confessed. And even then at the center of that section is these words from Jesus: every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. That is, all those who don't believe in the Word of God will not be saved. So at the heart of this entire section on faith and food, and there's all sorts of connections once you start pulling apart these various texts, they all got those things in them, faith and food, just about, is this first confrontation with these Pharisees, all coming down to them rejecting Jesus and his word, surrounded by two groups both receiving Jesus. Interestingly enough, both Jew and Gentile, as we're going to see. And interestingly enough, with various parallels and connections between them that don't exactly line up. Sometimes they offset each other. All right, with all that said, let's get into the text. Following this little run-in with the Pharisees at the center of the chiasm, Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. This is actually like the borderlands, the fringe of Jewish or Hebrew culture, where there's a lot of overlap with pagan cultures, and many of the people there would not actually be Jews. However, Jesus is going up into this area anyway, preaching and doing these miracles. And behold, we've been there before. Check it out. A Canaanite woman from that region came out. Now you do got to notice something here that's kind of silly. Canaanite. In the Greek, Kananiah. Let it roll off the tongue. Does it sound like the word canine? How interesting. Maybe that'll come back. Hold that thought. A Canaanite woman from that region came out crying, Eleison me, Kyrie, huios David. Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. Great prayer. Good stuff. Kyrie eleison. Lord have mercy. She goes on to explain why she's crying out for mercy. My daughter is badly demon possessed. Daimon zitai. Got the word daimon in there and you can even hear it. Daimon, demon. But something kind of crazy happens. He did not answer her. Not even a single word. So his disciples come to him and they're actually kind of getting frustrated by this woman who's crying out, have mercy on me, Son of David. And they say to Jesus, send her away, for she is crying out, apissen, behind us. Now, normally you might just kind of think this just means behind us. And it's true, it does. She's kind of following them around. But get this, what's Jesus been doing for this entire gospel? What did he say when he first came preaching? Didn't he use words like, follow me? In just about a chapter and a half, when Peter confesses Jesus to be the Christ, but then tells him being the Christ means not dying on a cross, doesn't Jesus say to Peter, get behind me, Satan? Now, is this just a matter of him saying, Satan, get out of the way, or is there something more spiritual going on? That is, that the people who oppose Jesus always try to stand before him. They think they are there to teach. They think they are there to lead. But the reality is that salvation through Christ comes from being behind him. And think of this all the more with him hanging on his cross and the wrath of God in front, so that you stand before Christ and guess what you're going to get? Whereas being behind him, you receive all the mercy that flows through his blood and scars. All the more literally then, when you follow him, you hear his word and believe. So ironically a little bit, this woman is where she's supposed to be and the disciples are not. Where were they? On the lake? They went before him across the sea. And ran into demon issues. She's already got her demon issues. And now she's behind him calling out. So here you see the parallel. Jew and Gentile, before, behind, both wrestling against the evil, one hidden in nature, one manifesting itself through possession. Both say, Lord, do this thing for me. Coincidence? But then Jesus turns and he says to her, I have not been sent except to the sheep, apololata, the having been perishing ones, the being destroyed ones, the ones already destroyed in the past and remaining in a state of destruction, because this is a past perfect participle. Hola heck, gold mine. So when your English just says the lost sheep, yes, that's technically right, but it's kind of a little weak. He's sent to the absolutely destroyed remnant of faith remaining in present day for them, Israel, which is true. When she calls him Son of David, what is the Son of David? That actually is a term for the Messiah, the anointed heir to the throne of David, which shall rule over Israel forever. And to usher in the perfect kingdom. So she's like a foreigner who's totally ahead of the game. And yet he says to her, well, I really wasn't sent to you. I'm here to be king of this people, this bloodline. Now, whereas Peter is confronted by the storm and absolutely backs off in the issue of faith, sinking into the water, this woman is confronted by Jesus himself. And in spite of the rebuke and his very clear statement that he was sent to save the Jews, she recognizes what's just happened and what's going to happen again at this whole feeding thing. That every time he feeds the house of Israel, he has 12 basketfuls and 7 basketfuls left over. That is, there's plenty of holiness to go around, even enough for the church. And the church is not just about the Jews. Oh, is that allegory? No, not really. It's just kind of hinted at. Hint, hint. And if you think I'm nuts, just listen to the words she says. But first, we've got to deal with the rest of the prayer. He says, I was sent to Israel. And she replies, in parallel to Peter's, Lord, save me. Lord, help me. Same construction in the Greek, shifting of one word, save and help. Different words, same meaning. Although, of course, she's praying for him to help someone else. Interesting that. To which he answers, it is not right to take the bread of the children. Bread? Have we been talking about bread recently? Baskets of bread? Leftover bread? Small bread made into big bread with no reason except that Jesus is the son of David? Yeah, huh. It is not right to take the bread from the children's table and throw it to the kunarios. Kananaya, Kananios, Canaanite, kunarios. Can you hear it? And guess what this word means? Kunarios. We actually get our word canine from it. Dog. Little dog. Yippee yippee dog. You know, the kind you don't like. Yip 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 yip. But hey, you know what? The dogs. Now, is Jesus calling this woman a dog? No. Unless you're a Jew, he's calling you a dog. That is, anyone who is not of this house of Israel is not rightly, at this point in time, part of the children and people of God. Promises were to the blood of Abraham. That's gonna change, huh? And listen to her reply. He's talking about giving out bread to the Jews and says, I'm not gonna do what I'm doing for the Jews, for the dogs. And she says, oh yes, master, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the children's table. Were there baskets full of crumbs and bread pieces left over? And to this, once again, we have a parallel with the story of Peter sinking in the water. He has said, Lord, save me. She has said, Lord, help me. And he has said to Peter, oh, you of little faith. Yeah, little faith. But this calling out for the crumbs, the leftovers, the church beyond the bloodline of Abraham, pulls from Jesus the reply, oh, gunai. Literally, oh, woman. Megale su he pistis. Great is your faith. And then there's an imperative here which should be translated with a future must. It shall be, it will be, it must be for you as you have willed it, as you have desired it. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Thus the text. Now, hopefully you've seen how this parallel with Peter and the water all lines up, as well as the connection points of the bread being given with basketfuls left over on either side. He's healing many of all diseases of every kind, also in the middle, leading towards this center section, which unfortunately you won't get a chance to preach on or hear preached on because the pericope is going to move right on past it into Matthew 16 next week. But it's all about the lifting up of the traditions of men as outward things that make one righteous, and Jesus calls all of that down. He condemns those who stand against him in this preached word which he brings. There's not really any gospel in that center nugget because it is all condemnation of those who've rejected it. The gospel's in these texts surrounding it, these people who are receiving Jesus, both from the Jews and from the Gentiles, both with little faith and with great faith, all of it through faith, all of it with this bread coming from the mouth of God. There's enough left over to go around for everyone. Of course, this is all on the way to the cross, where this bread from heaven, who is himself, this word of God incarnate himself, this Messiah, son of David, will have mercy on, will save, will help the entire human race, including you, by dying and rising in your place. Pretty sweet stuff. If you got a nice Bible that manages to get 14 and 15 on the same pages, you can sit there and see this sucker all lined up. It is a beautiful piece of Matthean, Hebraic aiming, Old Testament alluding to, typologically fulfilled Christian theology centered in the Word of Christ to be received by faith alone. Yeah, good stuff, righto?